Movie Wars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 0049 of the Movie Wars podcast. You got Kyle here, and what's up, Matthew? What's going on, man?
Hey, how we doing, Movie Wars folks? It's great to be back on Movie Wars, man.
I'll tell you what, Matthew Blevins, my friend in comedy and a fellow movie guy, a former film critic, and a lot of you met him for our Friday the 13th special, and people loved you so much, they asked me to bring you back. And I was like, hey, I want to do a Mad Max franchise, and you were all in.
Heck yeah, dude! I'm here for Mad Max, man, and I'm surprised to hear that your audience loved me and stuff. I don't know how to feel about that. I don't take love easily or well. You can ask all of my family about that.
Yeah. Well, I tried to call them, and they pretended they didn't know who you were, so it was weird.
That's smart.
Yeah, it was weird. Mine too, though. So we're orphans. We're two orphans in a boat here. So, or what did Daniel Plainview say? Bastards in a basket. So from There Will Be Blood, you're bastard in a basket. But yeah, we're talking about Mad Max, and I'm so stoked to get to talk about Mad Max. I've been looking for a reason, and it's funny, I'm doing two different series right now. I'm doing this with you. I'm doing The Crow with comedians Drew Davis and Seth Keys. And, because they did some reboots or, different versions this year, I was like, this would be a good opportunity for me to finally do two franchises I love, because I'm not like a big MCU guy. I'm not like... Franchises have kind of been keeping theaters open through the MCU. I don't like the MCU. I'm not trying to be that guy. I'm not like trying to be so pro Scorsese in that opinion. But, it's just not my thing. It's too big. There's too many hands in the pot. There's too much money. There's too much pop culture and cliche built into it. And I'm a contrarian. And I think Mad Max and The Crow are two very contrarian, counterculture type of things to love this day and age. And where I got my love for Mad Max is my dad. My dad, most of our audience knows my dad was not a good dude. He was a cop, but he was a drunk. But one good thing I always got from my folks is good music and good entertainment. I watched movies way too young. You and I, we talked a lot about RoboCop last week, and Mad Max was one of those. And all of those movies that were, basically through Thunderdome, because that's what we had, were on repeat in the house. And I just always found them to be very hypnotic, almost. And my research actually verified this, because the way that George Miller wanted to film some of those scenes is they wanted to film from road level to where you're seeing the lines. And he purposely, in my research, I covered that he wanted it actually, some of that, the camera work to be hypnotic. It's wild, right?
Yeah. And plus, I don't know if your childhood was similar to mine, but like, watching Aussie bikers beat the crap out of each other was kind of soothing anyway. I mean, it just went along with the childhood trauma recipe. It looked like a conventional Saturday where my folks would hang out.
Yeah, just throwing like empty McDonald's bags at people that drive by the trailer type of thing. Just yeah. That is a Saturday.
Oh man, it is such free entertainment too, dude. You could squeeze an entire Saturday out of that. I might do that this weekend.
Are we neighbors? Were we neighbors? I feel like we were neighbors and we didn't know it growing up. The neighborhood sounds very familiar. Well, very cool. So some other reasons I really love Mad Max is, and this is pretty well known, but I had some interesting thoughts about this I'd love to bounce off you. One of those is that Mad Max is a, it's known for kind of breaking the norms in terms of dystopia. It kind of broke that genre open. And it's not that films in the past hadn't focused on dystopia, but because we had World War II, the Cold War, Vietnam, people were really concerned with what could lead to the end of the world. And I don't know if you agree, but it feels like compared to the commentary films of today, which are kind of caked in bias and they tend to go in with a point of view, the artists during those time, I would lump, Coppola, I would lump Oliver Stone, some of these people, some of these filmmakers from the era were almost journalists in a way. Not that they were telling a whole truth. I would compare it more to Thompson, like a Hunter S. Thompson type,
right.
a little bit
of poetic truth, maybe, yeah,
a little bit, but still almost felt like real time reporting in movie format. And the films that depicted dystopia were typically depicting some kind of power, powerful government entity. I think of Philip K. Dick's, The Man in The Man in High Castle. I always forget the Man in the High Castle. We had Metropolis in 1927, Fahrenheit 451, and Things to Come in 1936, the H.G. Wells novel. Wells was really good at this. But they're all kind of depicting almost this government power overreach happening. Whereas Mad Max is kind of like, it's bedlam. It was kind of one of the first movies to say, yeah, we got dystopia, but there's not this government entity. It's just gangs. It's just violence, and it's just crazy people. And of course, it goes without saying some of the biggest impacts that it had was the stunt work, obviously. Miller talks about how the stunt work and the cars and the motor gangs, dystopia was almost chosen as the thing to move it forward. So they didn't start with a premise of dystopia. They had this influence, what you referred earlier, of this oil shortage and this gas shortage, and kind of thinking that like these road gangs would do anything for the oil. That was kind of where it started. It was like, well, how do we find ourselves in that situation? And that's where the dystopia was kind of introduced. But one of my favorite things is that this one, not so much. It's a little bit this, but it's not, but not as much as the others. Eventually, these become a Western, and that's what's pretty wild. A stranger walks into town. And we're going to go through the whole franchise, which is really exciting, and we're going to see a lot more.
Well, even the first one, I feel like is very much rooted in those Western tropes. You've got those crumbling halls of justice, like some sort of frontier Wild West jail cell,
Saloon.
where a saloon where you've got these hero cowboys that are kind of wandering the desert with their trusty cars. It's very much rooted, and I feel also like transitively, or it's rooted then in the Japanese samurai films that were then rooted in those American westerns, and especially the Italian spaghetti westerns as well. So it's like a mishmash of all of these world influences combined with George Miller, working in a hospital and witnessing all of these autocides, a lot like what we were talking about with Tom Savini on the Friday the 13th episode, is feeling a necessity to pay homage or bring some sort of truth to the screen in those experiences.
I love that. Yeah, and what's interesting too is like if you look at my favorite Western, it's funny, I didn't grow up liking Westerns, but I actually love them now, and my favorite is the Dollars trilogy with Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood was in those movies. He's almost a smart ass. Like he's a stranger that walks into town, but he kind of likes seeing the chaos he can create. He's like, let's see what I can do here. Max is more, I think he would just rather disappear, and the further you get in the franchise, especially when you hit Fury Road, I think he would rather, the way his character's painted, he would rather not have been in that situation, especially compared to the other ones. Like he's always reluctant. He's always trying to I want to get out of here and move on. But he gets sucked in no matter how, no matter how reluctant he is.
Yeah, absolutely. When Max cannot avoid being sucked into helping and then being heartbroken all over again. Yeah. So, poor Max. But we need our stoic heroes that just emerge from kind of typical circumstances. You've got that's why I love Max so much, and then I hated Furiosa so much. Is you've got an everyman. This isn't rooted in misogyny or anything like that. But what I'm saying is you've got an everyman that came from a relatively normal life who had to adapt to these circumstances, versus the Furiosa story who came from these exceptional circumstances and then turned out to be a hero. Well, obviously, it's like. Yeah, you would be. You're going to be a hero.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be interesting going into the Furiosa discussion because I did see that in theaters, and I didn't have my Movie Wars eyes on the time, so I'm going to put my Movie Wars eyes on for that one. What are your impressions of this one? We're going to go through the whole franchise, but just focusing on 1979. How do you associate with this film? What are your feelings about it?
Well, so for me, I've got to kind of contextualize what was happening in Australian cinema at that time, because Mad Max was very much a product of what was going on in Australian cinema at the time. Is particularly films like Stone, Sandy Harbut, 1974. It's a biker movie. It has some of the most absurd, insane stunts you've ever seen. It's like life-threatening. You're just wondering why anyone would be willing to push themselves this far for like a B movie, but that's what makes it so special. And the other cool part about that particular movie is you've got a Hugh Keys-Byrne as a character named Toad in that movie, and so it's kind of rooted in those early Mad Max movies and Fury Road again. And then a movie like Wake in Fright, directed by Ted Kotcheff in 1971. It kind of kicked off a lot of the artier Australian movies, but very much rooted in exploitation. You've got a school teacher who is literally fist fighting a kangaroo in the outback, and there's no tongue in cheek there. It's all played very straight, and it's a thriller, and it's like nothing you've ever seen before. And you've got movies like Dead End Drive-In, where 1986 Brian Trenchard Smith, where it's a concentration camp for youths, disaffected youths, but it's in a drive-in movie theater, and it kind of and it's got all of that action as well, and so Mad Max is part of this like rich tapestry of Australian cinema that was kind of happening at the time, that was kind of just emerging. They didn't have a very like deep movie tradition in Australia. Some of their earlier movies that came out, they were all just comedies. They were broad comedies, and no one had kind of messed with that artier stuff until you get these directors who were doing these biker movies, kind of emulating what was going on in American cinema at the time. And I imagine that something like Easy Rider had a huge impact on what was going on at the time in the counterculture cinema. But if you want to know a lot about what was happening in Australian cinema, check out Not Quite Hollywood. It's a great 2008 documentary. It'll send you down some really awesome rabbit holes. So Mad Max is definitely a part of that tradition. And it's one of the best examples of movies of that time. Primarily because of the cast in a lot of ways. Mel Gibson was just like a film student at the time, and it was just this outrageous find to find this guy that could say so much with so little. He could emote everything through his eyes, and it brought so much to that movie, which otherwise, if you're dealing with like the biker characters and whatnot, it goes into goofy student film territory at times because of the way that these guys are playing their characters. But I don't begrudge it. It's very much a product of the movies of the time.
This would probably be an anecdotal thought, but what do you think societally, like, I guess combine the idea of cinema in America? We kind of touched on this a little bit. I think some of this time period you're talking about, not all of it, but some of it kind of rubs elbows with what was considered to be a decline in cinematic history in the United States, because the cinemas were going bankrupt. There was a lot of private equity happening with like this, how Paramount happened was, acquisition, mergers, buying up defunct and broke production companies was happening. What was it you think societally and artistically happening in the United States comparatively to allow like such an explosive? Because I mean, those other movies are great. Everything you're talking about is great, but Mad Max is the one that jumped over, and that's the one that changed things.
Yeah, why that one versus any of the others? I'm not sure. I mean, the AIP logo at the beginning of the movie might be an indication of how it was able to get American distribution, and maybe Corman was able to get it distributed over here, get it seen by American audiences, and it was able to translate in a way that maybe some of those others couldn't, because it says so much with so few words. It's it's not. It doesn't feel like an Australian movie necessarily. It feels like just a Western cut from the apocalypse. It's the first movie isn't necessarily of that apocalyptic world. The only thing that kind of hints at it is that crooked U on the halls of justice and just the crumbling, infrastructure. But seemingly, it's still fancy enough to have cabarets out of A Clockwork Orange. Yeah. So it seems it's not quite fully decayed yet.
Maybe this is another anecdote, but maybe kind of referring back to my monologue, like art was dealing with what could cause the end, not necessarily investigating what the end would look like at the time. Now we have a surplus of those, but at the time, that's what, and maybe it's because it answered the question. Maybe it's not realistic, or maybe it is. That's not the question we're answering. It was just like all of a sudden we got a film that's nodding to those instincts, saying, for decades of war, from World War II, Cold War, Vietnam, all of that, we're worried about the end. But here's a movie. I mean, I think Dr. Strangelove almost kind of answers that question, right? But here's a movie that says, hey, here's one idea of what that could look like. Here's a possible end result of all the shit. that you've been dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to watch these movies now through the lens of someone who's lived through the actual Book of Revelations now.
Yeah.
So it seemed like Mad Max 1 all the way to Fury Road was this huge presumptive leap, but it's like, no, that's not that far off from what happens. I've seen it happen. It's not that far off. Things have gotten really Technicolor out
Yeah,
here.
I mean, we got all you have to look back to is COVID with the toilet paper, and then any time there's been a possible gas shortage. You know, people get in fights, and now in the era of social media, I don't know if you remember the last gas shortage we had in Nashville a couple years ago, but people were like getting in fights, like cutting in line. Some guy had a tarp in his truck, and he was filling the entire back of his truck with gas. You know, with no like it gets rough pretty quick around here, man.
It does. It's interesting to see what the Immortum Joes look like before they get their major costume upgrades, though. You know, you just some idiot at a Nashville gas station. You know, you don't know what his future is. He's going to be a despot one day. He's going to monologue the shit out of somebody.
Yeah, I've been working a bit actually about cannibalism. You know, basically how if like the apocalypse happened, I don't know. Like my best shot is to be a court jester for a warlord, like an Immortum Joe. And but I say like you know these people, like the people that are leading the cannibal cults and the death cults and the war. Like you're working. These people are the janitors in your office building, or maybe even your account. Like you just don't know, but these people are there. They're already amongst you. Like,
yeah, I think they're producing comedy shows largely based on my personal experiences.
Yeah. It's us. It's us. Welcome to. I hope you taste good. Yeah, it's.
Actually, no. You know, I'm not talking about the artists. Okay. Producers. I'm talking about the producers who actually get full shows. Those are the ones who are dangerous. Yeah. They're going to be they're already almost there.
That's amazing. Well, awesome. I love that information. Thank you. So just a quick call to the audience. So we're back. Movie Wars is back. Took a little bit of a break, and I'm loving this format to have my comedian friends doing interviews with people in the industry, having just guest hosts. It's been so fun because I'm experiencing all these flavors. But the best thing you can do is share an episode in all the podcast forums, especially Spotify, Apple. It's so easy to share to your social media, to your Instagram stories, to send to a friend, just telling a friend. It may seem really basic, really simple, but honestly, that is the most easy and most fun way to grow, is telling your friends, whether it be digitally or in person, or your grandma. You know, we're great with the grandmas. We have a huge grandma demographic, especially with the Cold War stuff. Couple series I got going on. So I have this amazing series with my friend Matthew that we're doing with Mad Max. We're going to do the whole franchise. I've got, starting on the 29th, we're going to start recording The Crow with Drew Davis, who's a comedian here in Nashville, and Seth Keys, who's also a comedian. He's also in the film industry. And then next week I'm interviewing, I think it's going to be next week, still nailing down the details, but I'm interviewing Alan Powell, who's a friend of mine. Alan works for a production company. He's actually part owner of Monarch Media, and they were one of the main producers of the Hitman movie that really took off on Netflix with Glenn Powell, who's kind of this new, almost Matthew McConaughey Jr. He was in Twisters and he was in Maverick, and all of a sudden he's in everything. And so it's funny. I hadn't talked to my friend Alan in a while, and then I saw Monarch Media, and I was like, oh my gosh, like that's my friend. So he's going to come on, and he's going to talk about that process and what it was like to be a part of that movie. And in a couple weeks, I'm doing There Will Be Blood with my friend Zach Hoffman. Zach Hoffman's an actor. He was my voice coach when I was doing voiceover work, and he's actually he's going to be voicing in the new Batman animation that's coming out. He's one of the voices in that. So he's an incredible guy, and his favorite movie of all time is There Will Be Blood, and it's one of mine. So we're going to do that. So again, just share with your friends, and that helps us the most. We're going to go to randos now. Bringing back the randos. So the cast and the crew threatened to quit several times because George Miller was so inexperienced that he wasn't arrogant about it either. He was very open. He had no idea what he was doing, you know, and he was funding this with his medical career. He was going through his, what do they call it? He was a doctor, but what do they call it when they're doing their like, he was doing his residency, and he was filming all these film projects with his residency money. I think
that's incredible. He was like the Australian Tommy Wiseau over there.
Yeah, and the cast and crew, including Mel Gibson, they just kept trying to quit, and he's just like, wow, this is Australia, this is a movie, what are we going to do? So they made it through. And you said this earlier, but Mel Gibson did not go into audition for Max. He was hopping along with a friend of his that was a fellow drama student, and they saw him and said, "Why don't you audition?" And he did, and he got it over his friend. So he had zero intentions of trying to get this role, and now we know Mel Gibson, for better or for worse, but we know Mel Gibson.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a lot of ways, I think for better. I mean, the guy was a brilliant actor, if not a twat in real life. But, you know, he's had iconic roles. This series is just one example. So.
Yeah, and he's really gifted. He's a gifted director. He's a very gifted visionary. I love the camera work and the cinematography he inspires in a lot of his films. I think of Apocalypto, Passion of the Christ. These are movies, whether or not you're a Christian or not, you can't watch the movie and think, damn, this movie has some imagery. And I think he's and Lethal Weapon, we did a Lethal Weapon episode a couple of months before we shut down for a little while. I just was reveling in his performances. Like he was Mad Max, but he was actually a little crazier in Lethal Weapon than he is in Mad Max.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because he was actually suicidal. Max is just kind of surviving. That's his base instinct, is just survive. And Riggs is the opposite of that. He doesn't want to survive at all. And this self-destructive quality, it's one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, it's so good. In fact, I got to go back again, man. And Joe Pesci's one of my favorite actors of all time. I love it when he enters the series. They fuck you in the drive-thru.
Yeah, it's so obnoxious and it's so infectious. They're just fun, man. It's like, if you don't like Lethal Weapon, you can just kiss my ass, I guess. I'm going on record.
I think we have to arrange that, actually. We need a public kissing of the ass if you don't like Lethal Weapon. Both of us. Every inch. One kiss per square inch of my ass. All right. This film was used what George Miller referred to as guerrilla filmmaking. They weren't getting permits, and this takes place on public roads, streets, highways. They had people patrolling areas looking for cops, and sometimes they had to get out of tickets and argue the way out of getting violations. And Australia even then was still pretty heavily regulated, not compared to today, but they were sneaking around making these scenes happen. That's pretty wild to think about.
Yeah.
Someone in film not getting permits to do a movie. I mean, today that seems, with today's Hollywood, that's so outlandish.
Yeah, I respect that kind of just go make it attitude. I don't know. You don't get a lot of that anymore. You want an independent movie where people were willing to go to jail or maybe die to make it happen. People aren't that passionate about art anymore. Maybe that's just what's missing.
Yeah. Art with permission is always a weird thing, right? Like, go back to when Pearl Jam got their first Grammy, and they're like, "I can't believe you're giving us an award to make art." And that's seriously what they said from the podium. It's like, this is music. Like, I have a statue, a trophy for music, and I agree with that. The bikers were real bikers from real biker gangs, and they were paid in beer. So if you thought they were authentic, which, they weren't the rowdiest, but maybe it's because real bikers aren't as rowdy as they're depicted. I mean, although I've read Hell's Angels a couple of times by Hunter S. Thompson. Those are pretty wild.
Yeah, Hey, I bought my first motorcycle after reading that book in 2003. It sent me on a whole life path, man. I had to stop reading books for a while. I'd read a Kerouac book and then drink a bunch of Christian Brothers port and puke all over my Xbox. It's like, come on. I took 10 years off of reading.
I won't record this, but I'll tell you what I did after I read Silence of the Lambs. And Red Dragon. It was wild. It was a wild night. Yeah. Dude, that is hilarious. I just gotta say, side note, like, that's probably a top 5 book is Hell's Angels. And
absolutely. Yeah. It's I mean, it not only just kind of captures this counterculture that nobody knew anything about, but just kind of launched Hunter himself as this character who was willing to put himself on the line for anything. And, God love him.
By far my favorite writer. Not necessarily my favorite author, but in terms of just reading his voice, my favorite. Just...
Absolutely.
You get 2 pages in and you've lost all sense of whether or not you're in reality or not. And I love that feeling.
Absolutely. And, the biker culture was a really big thing in the 70s. It was kind of that post-war, that post-Vietnam War thing, or actually, I guess biker culture goes back as far as World War II, where you got these guys coming back, and they had these old bikes, and they made them work out of necessity, and then they were like, screw your rules. We've been to war, and you're not going to tell us what to do, and so. That attitude kind of permeates Australia and American culture of the 70s, and you'd have to think it's because you got wide open spaces and affordable gasoline. Yeah. So, let's go on an adventure. And in Australia, I guess it's going to be lined. The highways are going to be lined with marauding outlaws, I guess, from everything I've seen.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing I didn't touch on in the opening, but. It's interesting to me, like once the dystopian thing broke, just kind of responding to your comment, it's very focused, like, zombies, it's basically, biker gang or, road gangs, Mad Max, zombies, or some sort of contagion, is kind of like they have to focus. The most, general version I can think of in modern writing and filmmaking that's a more general approach to the apocalypse was The Road, both the book, and the movie Cormac McCarthy. I felt like that was kind of an interesting generalized, like, yeah, they had some possible cannibals, some, some groups, but it kind of just felt like we were in the apocalypse, whereas a lot of other, they can't really do the apocalypse without having a niche. It's like, we got to have a niche apocalypse here. We can't have like a multi, faceted thing. They got to have some zombies, or it's got to be a contagion, or it's got to be, biker gang, whatever it is. Like it's kind of an interesting thing. Sure. Like I don't know why. Maybe it's because it wouldn't be interesting if we just had like, hey, we're in the apocalypse now. Yeah. Like we're reopening the banks. We're going back to the gold standard.
Yeah,
we're
not going to tell you what happened. We don't like talking about it. It was kind of traumatic. You're kind of a dick for bringing it up, honestly.
Yeah, we're post-apocalypse now. We're good. We're trying.
Yeah,
we found the satellites. We're good. So, all right, well, we're going to start the war score now. So I wanted to kind of reintroduce this because this is the first time I've done it on the podcast since we came back. It used to be that we did 2 movies at a time, so we had 2 movies competing. So that's how the categories were formed. Now we do 1 movie at a time. There's a lot of reasons for that. First of all, it's easier, and it's not that I'm trying to be a pansy, say I don't like to prepare. That's the problem is I prepare too much, and by preparing for 2 movies, it took a lot of time, so it's hard to make a lot of content and to make a lot of shows, and I like the idea of doing more, and doing 1 movie at a time helps. So we kind of tweaked the war score, so we're still doing 7 categories, but instead of picking one movie or the other because there's not 2 movies, we're doing a yes or a no. The end result is basically going to be an approval, an affirmative, or a negative. And what's fun is the yes is always going to be associated with some theme from the movie or some quote, and the no will be associated with some quote or some theme from the movie. In this case, positive is shiny and chrome. Yes, that's right. We're going to Fury Road. Fury Road. We're going to use that as our yes. But if it's a negative, it's just a blood bag. Yeah, that's a blood bag. No. And in the case, because Matthew and I are just 2, if we split, we're going to give half points. So it's just going to split between the 2, and that'll go in as a half point. When we have 3, when it's me, Drew, and Seth, that's not going to be a problem because we're going to always probably have, we're always going to have 2 versus 1, and we'll be able to nail that down. But that's how the new scorecard works. So I had to take a moment to kind of explain the technicality of that. You ready to get into it?
Let's go.
All right. First category, top bill cast. What do you think? Blood bag or shiny and chrome?
Shiny and chrome, man. You've got Goose. You've got Mel Gibson in his first role. It's pretty fantastic, and yeah, it's iconic. What are you gonna say? Yeah.
I think it's a strength here. And Mel Gibson's not doing a lot. George Miller described this as a silent movie with sound. That's exactly how he described it. Yep. And it is that. It's got a lot of that silent movie technique to it where there's so much action, and maybe because there was so much action and it was new, this was a new type of filmmaking. And maybe because of the guerrilla nature, they didn't want to get too lost in dialogue. If you're trying to avoid the police, you probably don't want to get into 100 takes, Joaquin Phoenix style. You want to get in, get out, and
a couple of eyebrow raises, and then let's go. We got
it's like
but. Yeah, he was able to do so much with so little, though. That you just can't be mad at that performance. With if it had more dialogue, I don't think we'd be talking about it.
True,
today.
And I think the biggest thing you have to assess is if the premise is this is a person that was normal and then turns mad. How is that depicted on screen? And And this really became, what's interesting is this kind of became his moniker, you know, and once his wife and child die, when he's in that hospital leaning against the wall listening to the doctors talk, he's sweating, his eyes are unblinking, and he looks mad. I was thinking that last night when I was rewatching it. I was like, he looks mad there, and that was his job, and he over-delivered on it. So, all right, we got one on Shiny and Chrome. Supporting cast, what do you think?
You know, are we talking the primary bikers? Would they be part of that supporting cast? Because the 3 primary bikers, I think all did a pretty fantastic job.
I can read them off if you want. Joanne Samuel as Jesse Roxdansky, Hugh Keys Byrne as Toe Cutter, who also played Joe in Fury Road, Steve Bisley, Jim Goose, Tim Burns played Johnny the Boy, Roger Ward as Fifi McAfee, Lisa Alderhoven as the nurse, and then from there it's general bikers. And
yeah, this is Shiny and Chrome for sure, dude. The Fifi character, what he was able to bring to that character, just standing there shirtless with a scarf and leather pants on, but bringing that kind of like Mick from Rocky sensibility to the character. It had this nurturing thing about him. The wife was fantastic. She did everything she needed to do. I don't know if she spoke at all. She played saxophone really well, so that, you know, I'm definitely Shiny and Chrome on the supporting cast.
And can we just talk about how like the end is so abrupt and dark, and he finally kills the last guy, and then it cuts right to that fucking saxophone. Yeah. It's just like the saxophone's back. It's like I'm into it because I love the movie and I'm biased, but I mean, zoom out, it's like that's kind of weird.
Yeah, absolutely. But it invented its own little cinematic language all throughout, because even when the wife and kid get ran over by the biker gang, you had the shoe, the ball, and then you heard the crow, which was a constant refrain throughout the movie. If you notice, there was that crow. So it's like George Miller he was inept, or he was just starting, but he already knew how to invent that little cinematic language and then speak volumes, and your brain was able to imply the massacre with so little.
Yeah, for a guy, that's such a great point. What you kind of brought to my mind, for a guy that the cast and crew kept walking out on because he didn't know what he's doing a lot here. He's doing a lot here.
Absolutely. You got the halls of justice, you've got the signs on the highway that are kind of telling the whole story. You've got the little intercuts to bulging eyeballs that are just insinuating all of the terror and the action. He's doing a lot with very little.
Yeah, I go Shiny and Chrome here too, and it's honestly the same exact thing you said. The scarf, the no shirt, the leathers. Just these guys are establishing personas. There's no backstory. We're not getting biographies of these guys, but I feel like once I meet them, I'm in. And that's a huge thing.
Yeah, you know who they are. You know who they are. They're archetypical characters, and you could take the Goose character and make him a sidekick in any Western, and we all know who that guy is, and we're all going to be heartbroken when he dies.
You're right. That is another big Western thing, like a lot, and that happens in the Dollar trilogy. Like, you don't get a backstory, but there's a certain look, the way a person talks, how they handle their business. Like, I'm into this. I'm down. Like, I like this guy.
Yeah. You know who this guy is. You know who this guy is. But you know if his name is Goose, he's probably going to die in a fire.
Yes. That was one funny thing. And I started to wonder, did Scott, when he was naming the characters in Top Gun, was there some weird, they both have the hair, Yeah, not a very common name.
What side dishes do you serve with barbecued goose? That's all I need to know.
Airplane parts. All right, we got two Shiny and Chrome, 0 blood bag here. Vehicular manslaughter. This is a category for just describing the road vehicles, because that's the constant theme. And by the way, side note, one thing I didn't mention in teaching the crew about the way this works now, we're going to use this across the whole franchise. We've never tackled whole franchises in Movie Wars history. I'm so stoked to do that now. And so the goal is to identify categories that move across the whole franchise. So we'll be using these for everyone. At the end, we'll do a total, and we'll give closing remarks. We'll stack rate the franchise, but also we'll talk about kind of the end results of all the categories when combined. So, but vehicular manslaughter, what do you think about the vehicles, the road warfare? It's kind of hard because we're watching number 1, and we have all this other data. afterwards. So you got to kind of
it's playing a different game, But if you're putting it up against all of the other Australian cinema at the time, it's a top contender for one of those road movies. It's up there with all of those others that I was talking about. It does it really well, and that Interceptor, you're basically creating another iconic character in and of itself. Yeah, I'd have to go shiny and chrome on that, just because you have to take things in the context in which they were made, and for an inept director who was kind of on his debut feature with a first-time actor, and these are trusty chariots. It's amazing. So yeah, shiny and chrome for sure.
I agree. And what you said, this actually hits on something that annoys me about modern culture and society with social media. I'm a guitar player. I moved here to play guitar originally before I got into comedy and podcasting. And I follow guitar players, and there's this craze with online guitar players, and that's what they do. They shred, they're great, they're fantastic, but they play on social media. They're not in a band. They're not posting themselves playing with other people. They're just really great shredders. And you'll read the comments, and if you see a Hendrix video, it's very popular to bash Hendrix. And I got, as you can see, I got my vinyl back here. That's a picture of Jim Morrison. That's my music. It's Hendrix, The Doors. That's my shit. And people, it's very popular. Like, oh, Hendrix wasn't, just because he was the first, he was really sloppy. And it just annoys me to no end. Because, so technically speaking, he wasn't, even Stevie Ray Vaughan was a more technical player than he was. But just the loss, I don't know where this loss and this lack of adoration for the classics and for the first comes from. And I think you and I really hit this. I think, what did we kept saying on the Friday the 13th? The time and context. And people lose that frame. Yeah. And so whenever I watch a movie like this, whenever I go back to a film from a while ago, like I try to tune out what I'm seeing now and try to tune into the context. This is brave. This is a brave film, especially when you learn about the guerrilla aspect. They don't have permits. They're trying to get it done. They hired a guy that's a drama student. This, it seems, compared to especially like Fury Road, the road tactics and the road warfare seems kind of tame. But at the time, this was wild.
Yeah, people nearly died. I mean, a guy got hit with the wheel of a motorcycle and started bleeding out of his ears and nose. I mean... Yeah, come on. And you mentioned the Pursuit Special. My favorite iconic vehicle of all time. I love the Batmobile. I love the Ghostbusters car. Those are two of my favorites. I like the plain RoboCop, just police car, the Detroit. But this one, it's so simple. But that engine block poking out the hood, I know nothing about cars, but I know that is super cool. Right. Did you see Bellflower, the indie film? No, you should see it. It's really interesting. Like it's kind of a very ephemeral, very crazy visual film. Like they actually used a camera that's made of like random parts, so the film looks very like frayed, and it's really crazy. You'd love it. But their goal, these two main characters, they're trying to build like a modern Pursuit Special, because they think the apocalypse is coming, and so they're actually trying to prepare but they're alcoholics. They're just crazy alcoholics that are just trying to build this Pursuit Special. But I love that modern kind of callback to it, and I love that. I don't know a lot of Mad Max fans. I'll be real. Like, I don't run into them. Like, people in my circles don't bring the movie up as much as I do, but the car does come up, and they do love the car. And I think, again, Miller's doing a lot here. And one thing I don't know if he did it intentionally, but he created an icon. And when you accidentally create an icon, that's pretty cool. So this is shiny and chrome for me. All right, next category here. I titled this, How Great Is This Apocalypse, Huh? This is where we're going to evaluate the setting. So one of the major themes, if you're watching Mad Max with us and you haven't gone through the whole franchise, one thing really important to pay attention to, and whether Miller is, again, we keep having to say that, whether he knew it or not because he was such a noob, each film gradually is more dilapidated. More apocalypse is setting in, less greenery, more desert, more crazy, more mutation, more radiation. Everything is just amping up. More budget. Yeah, more budget. So the category here is like, what is this? Is this a good apocalyptic setting to you? Are you feeling the end of the world here? Yeah, absolutely. Australia already looks like the end of the world. They just had to put a camera there. Yeah. I mean, It makes a lot of sense, and then to go into the Road Warrior from that, it was just a natural, easy progression. So if you put the movie in the context in which it was made, that's it's pretty ideal. And you've got these kind of weird Shakespearean bikers that they're not quite as pontificating as a Mortem Joe quite yet, but they're on their way there. So the only note that I had on the bikers though is like you have to be careful of the pretty biker. It's like he's the most dangerous one of the bunch, primarily because he has time for moisturizer.
Yeah.
So, like, where's he getting moisturizer in this apocalyptic landscape? Maybe that's the one part that's a problem. Is that he was like. Yeah, you don't look that good.
You got to though. Yeah, I mean, especially when the competition just changes, it just lessens. You know, like a post-apocalyptic bar, like you and I are 10s now. You know what I'm talking about? We're 9s, 10s. We're swooning the radioactive women in there. You know, that's our new thing. It's actually something to desire. You know,
the apocalypse.
Yeah, sure. Why not? What else you got to do? Right? Comedy.
Well. Well, okay, and then on the I forgot there was a point I had with the pretty biker is that if you watched a lot of Australian cinema at the time, it was very homophobic, very misogynistic. George Miller did not get into kind of females in lead role kind of heroic capacities until later, but this pretty biker character, these kind of gender ambiguous characters, these they would be called poofters in other Australian movies, but George Miller has them in his movie in this movie as badass characters that are dangerous. So in that and of is kind of a subversive. It's different than all of the other Australian cinema at the time.
Yeah, I love that, and that laid the groundwork for James Cameron. You know, it's like James Cameron shares almost and it's with them. It's not even a gender message. It's from this type of rubble can sprout strength. And whether or not we're going to talk about Furiosa, so we can dissect it at the end of the franchise. But one interesting thing about it, if you want to say there's an interesting thing about it, whether you like the film or not, is that it felt very organic. For a Furiosa Type 2 at least, the foundation's there in the way he's designed it. It's not odd. I think a lot of external people called it, if you want to call it woke or whatever the word is, people used it. There is that in cinema that's out there. I would not accuse George Miller of that. I think if you say George Miller is that, you haven't paid attention to Mad Max.
Yeah, his entire body of work has been hinting at these themes throughout, and it's very important, and it's very seminal to his work. And I think it probably came from, this is a guy who's educated, who was pursuing a medical field, and who got into filmmaking. So he probably had maybe a progressive bent on things, but he was able to hide it in these like misogynistic biker marauding characters. If you look right below the surface, there's some things that weren't happening in other Australian cinema.
Yeah. I hate to be the first to break blood bag here on the card here. So this is one area where I do try to zoom into context. My thing is that my modern view of the apocalypse is that, seeing as we've been through some things in our real history recently that have hinted at, let's get there. We got 3 wars going on in the world. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, we have Twitter now where you can open up and see soldiers being blown up in Gaza or in Ukraine. I mean, it's crazy. Things ramp up pretty quickly. And I think, you got the mechanic who's still just wearing that mechanic outfit, and he's like, oh, there's an ice cream place down there, and it.
Yeah. Oh man! And by the way, if you're going to an ice cream shop, like go to another one. This one's surrounded by murderous bikers. It's not even good ice cream. What's wrong?
Yeah, and
with
I haven't
you?
seen an animal. I haven't seen a cow. Where's the milk? Is this the mother's milk already? Is this from Fury Road? Is this a hint? Like, hey, we're already making ice cream out of this stuff. It's a whole industry. But I just didn't. It just didn't feel, and again, I give them credit for what they've accomplished here. It's still great. The setting's still great. It's just, I think if you could almost miss the oil thing. Like, you could almost miss that, and it almost could feel like, wait, are these just angry people in vehicles? Like, why are they mad? Like, why are they, you could almost miss it because the setting isn't necessarily giving you a lot. It's very green. Again, that's a slight blood bag. I don't want to say it's bad, but I'm just saying I just feel like personally that the real apocalypse is going to ramp up pretty quick, and there's going to be bodies. And I mean, look at L.A. and New York riots and everything that happened. I mean, how fast was glass getting shattered? The Chaz zone in Seattle that happened during COVID. They literally, like a couple of months into the pandemic, they had their own tent city set up in the middle of an intersection. And this stuff happens. Like, I'm just thinking the greenery is not going to be great. I don't know. That's just my own personal opinion. But again, still a fantastic setting. I just don't get major apocalypse vibes from it.
Yeah, and you have to also consider that a portion of it took place at a farm, and then another portion of it took place in this cabaret that seemed just completely out of place. There's some disparities in that for sure, but the halls of justice and what they were able to do with little more, they were basically able to posit the entire downfall of like the entire judicial process with some tattered suits and just a little decorum and whatnot, and it told an entire story. So from what he was able to do, it's not as epic or it's not as concise as later ventures, but there's also something I like a lot about this one where it doesn't feel like every moment of it was drafted on a storyboard.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, true. And they didn't have time for that, nor did they have the knowledge. Apparently Miller's a noob, so even though he's doing a lot of good stuff here. So our next category, one thing that's so distinct, probably my favorite element. I don't know why I like villains. This is why I love The Crow, because the first Crow, each villain was so unique, but not unrealistically unique. This has that too, and one thing I love about Mad Max is that the villains are often poetic, slightly Shakespearean, almost worshipped as a cult figure. These are some unique characteristics that are kind of shared across, and obviously they get more mutated, more crazy across once you get further and further into the franchise. But I like Toe Cutter and Joe and Humongous. It's Lord Humongous, right? Did I say that? Or is it Humongo? I always forget. Lord Humongous.
I thought it was Humongous from Furiosa, right? Yeah, but and then I'm trying to remember who the pretty boy was. I can't remember what his name is, but you've got a trio in that first movie of iconic villain characters, and then you're starting the movie with that Knight
Rider.
Shoot, Knight Rider,
Johnny the Boy is who you're talking
and
about.
even Johnny the Boy, you had Knight Rider, you had these iconic villain characters. They were all psychotic and out of their mind, and they were pontificating all of these like soliloquies, and these weren't just bikers. They were, I don't know, they were already off their rocker.
Yeah, it's very unique and it's very cool. And I'll kick off on this one. I go straight shiny and chrome, and it's the start of something beautiful, and it's abbreviated in this one, and it gets a little more expanded in the future films in terms of the scope and the size of the gangs and the influence and their personalities. But it's a trait throughout the whole franchise that I think is unique to Mad Max and kind of set the groundwork for other franchises, is to say, hey, it's not just about the good guy. The bad guys need to be interesting too, and they're interesting. And Toe Cutter is interesting. He goes from being very poetic and he shows moments of sensitivity right before he shows absolute tyranny, but then he'll hiss. He hisses at Max on the bike like a badger. I mean, he sounded like some kind of badger creature. I don't even know if badgers hiss, but if a badger did hiss, it would sound like Toe Cutter. It's these frantic, and it's funny because the environment doesn't give me apocalypse as much in this movie, but the Toe Cutter does. The fact that
this guy's been through something.
Yeah, because he's brilliant, but he's hissing at people.
He was educated. It's like he was already educated. He already had this there's this weird aristocracy about him. Maybe like he had come from a higher class, and now he's in the dregs of society, and he's just going feral.
Yeah, and it's something that if you even take a modern version of this with The Walking Dead, this is something they try to do. And The Walking Dead has just it's been on too long, and it's just been a trash fire, but. The thing that Miller does in the way I don't know how he, with his lack of experience, directed these actors, but to me, Toe Cutter also feels organic, and some of the future entries we'll get into feel the same way. Like I feel like these villains are not over the top. Like for some reason, it feels like this is kind of how this would look.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know people like these guys. I mean, Yeah, most of them are doing open mic comedy, but if the apocalypse really kicks off, man, I'm going to have to pick one of these assholes.
Yeah, it's like you bombed last time, I was like, but now you have an actual bomb and you're threatening to throw it at people. So, but anyway, I go shiny and chrome all the way on this one, big time.
Yeah, I do too, and not to be like a broken record on the shiny and chrome, but it's like, what more can I say, dude? It's George Miller's directorial debut, and he was able to create something in 1979. This thing's a year older than I am, and it's just as fresh today as it was then. It's, you know, it's not without flaws, but it's also just a seminal example of what was going on in Australia at the time. And I do encourage people to go out and check out some of the other stuff that was happening, just so you're aware of all of the other cool shit that was out there. But you know, Mad Max 1979, it's like you're always going to know about that movie.
Yeah. Absolutely. My next category, man, I'm just reading my next category. What was did I change this on the other document? I'm going to cut this out. A stranger walks into town. My last two categories are very similar. I just picked up on this. Maybe we could rate it as like a Western.
Yeah, the Western quality, because they all have these differing Western qualities. Even Thunderdome has that kind of train sequence at the end, and you know, they've all got these little weird components. So I think that's a great avenue for exploration.
Okay, I'll go into it. I'm gonna snap again. Just give myself a time marker. All right. Well, so far we have 4.5 on shiny and chrome, and we have 0.5 on blood bag here. I think this is looking pretty good so far, but we got to finish these categories out. Next category is a stranger walks into town, and that's kind of how you describe the Western. And even though this is kind of an early version of that, you did say earlier, and I agree with you that it hinted at it. What do you think about the Western qualities here? Are they here? Are they here in a big way?
Yeah, they are, and Miller himself had talked about how the French were the first to pick up on this, which I find very strange, because it was like, it is so obviously an American Western. The tropes are all there. You've got the troublemaker, Johnny the Boy, gets picked up by the law enforcement, and they're going to ride into town and avenge their boy. And, it's all of the tropes of the American Western. They're all simple tropes, but they're still here because they work. So, yeah, it's not as overt of a Western influence as some of the others, I would say, but I would have to go, maybe I'll go, just for the sake of hedging my bets a bit, I'll go half a shiny and chrome on this one, because it's not as ensconced in that kind of Western mythos. The influences are obvious, but they could have, it could just as obvious if you were comparing it to a samurai film, or if you were comparing it to anything that's like a Joseph Campbell like heroic journey story. It would all qualify, I guess. Yeah,
and I'm in the same boat. I would split this as well. I think the qualities are there. I think because he starts off as the protagonist here, and this is where we see him turn into the other person, turn into Mad Max. I think those qualities, the Western qualities, kind of come out more in other films, and I think here it's very subtle. The parts where it does pick up a half and where it's really good to me is the way he's picking out people one by one. He's having to isolate people. The car is the horse that he's riding in the desert. And there are those elements, and I do like that, because that's another thing I just thought of. Like, he's got a horse. His car is his horse, and they're galloping. He's galloping from place to place to pick out these people that he's avenging, and that is the Western format. And so I think there are areas of it where it's not fully fleshed out yet, and I think we see more of that in the future, but I split with it as well, so I agree. One more category here, and it is 5-1 in terms of shiny and chrome, so it's going to be a positive, but we do have one more category to explore, and strangers in need. That's the other half of the Western equation. A stranger walks into town, but strangers in need. And we're not really honing in on the Western aspect, but one thing that's very unique to the Mad Max franchise is that Mad Max is mixing it up. He's entering town. He doesn't want to be there, but somehow he gets sucked into a conflict, whether it's someone's being bullied by the local villains, or they're out of gasoline, or whatever that is. And they're all varying. You know, once you start getting exposed to the bigger and bigger groups over the course of the film, you start to meet more types of characters. And I start asking myself, and I don't know if you think this, like, if I'm Max, like, is this worth my time? Like, these people are nuts. Like, some of them are cool, but some of them are comedians and probably doing open mics. Very weird. Very weird. So, but this is a very abbreviated thing. And in this one, we have to modify a little. We have to include Max in this a little bit because at the beginning, he's kind of himself. But then he does have people throughout towns, and he's almost preserving justice across the board, trying to be still, at the end, he's still part cop, part mad. What do you think in terms of Strangers in Need? Are these people we want to protect and save?
So, no, I think I'd have to go blood bag on this one because Max's needs and motivations are deeply personal in this movie, and they have to be to establish the mythos of this character. So it's not necessarily strangers in need that he's after or helping most of the time. A lot of times he's being driven by the death of his partner, by the death of his wife and child. These are all deeply personal motivations that are character building. But other than a couple of teenagers that they seem to want to get in on the action. They were excited by the bikers until the shit got too real. So I'm not sure if there's, other than some of the folks in the bronze, I don't know if there were redeemable characters in that Max universe. There were certainly victims, but if you're chasing after the thrill and you're in one of the, you're gonna just be asking for trouble.
Yeah, I went blood bag here too because there are people to save. There are strangers. We don't get to know them as well, but I'll classify his wife and child here. If this is the apocalypse, and maybe this is where my apocalypse sentiment came from in the first one, even though this is an environmental. If this is really a dystopian world, like. His wife and kid don't seem too scared or worried about it for the most part until trouble finds them, but she's playing saxophone, they're making jokes, they're resting in the grass, like they're on the beach. Like, where's the threat? Like, where's the imminent threat?
They obviously have no sense of threat at all if she's just going into an ice cream shop surrounded by murderers with her baby. It's like you have no maternal instincts for sure. Yeah. They named their kid, what was it, Sprague? Yeah. I think that they had whatever ill will was befell upon them, they earned it from that alone. Yeah. Don't name your kid Sprague.
Yeah, and just randomly play. Like, I like the saxophone, but come on, it's late. Like I've been, I've been chasing vigilantes all day. Like I could use some silence, some quiet. Can you just shut up with the saxophone?
Right. It's like. Yeah, take your shit to the mixed open mic and just let me have my piece. I know you're good at this. That's fine.
Between the beat poet and the bongo guy, like right there in the middle of that mixed open mic,
Oh man! And by the way, you can see me there next Thursday.
Oh, God. Yeah, let's start inviting people to civilians. You want to invite civilians to open mics here? That's a threat. Right. Is that a threat?
No. Oh man. It'll change your life, people. It's worse than Mad Max. I would give that a shiny and chrome on its post-apocalyptic qualities for sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially when the homeless guy. Have you ever been a part of one? This used to happen in Nashville all the time. Like, there was this crew of random hobos that would come in and do time. And, like, one of them would talk about how they stole a TV from a trash can, like, and that was their 5 minutes. And they'd always go over. It's light, it's like, and then
I miss those authentic, like, you don't get the authentic characters anymore. We're all working on our Kill Tony minute or whatever. It's like, screw all that. I need crazy people.
Yeah, maybe those were the George Millers, though. We just didn't know it.
Yeah.
Instead,
we were the cast and crew. They're like, these fucks don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. And now their name is Tony Hinchcliffe. I don't know who people like anymore.
Yeah,
amazing. Well, we just finished our first scorecard in the Movie Wars 2.0 era, 5-2. This is an affirmative, so 5-2, and this is getting a shiny and chrome. So in terms of the franchise stack rank, we're giving this a go. This is a good one. So this was fun, man. What did you think about that? Your first war card.
That was a blast. It's kind of fun to get those little things to kind of break it down in a way that I hadn't thought of. because people don't want to hear you break down the emotional context of characters for a half an hour. They'd rather have a fun scorecard. So, you know, I appreciate that.
Was it a touchdown or not? You know? That's what they want. Well, cool, man. Well, we're going to do Mad Max. This is funny, too. I always have a hard time saying the next one because it came out as one movie and then they renamed it Mad Max Road Warrior. I always just call it Road Warrior. Some people call it Road Warrior Mad Max 2. Some people call it Mad Max 2 Road Warrior. I just call it Road Warrior. But we're going to do that one next. So, and that's the one that is not just considered to be the most beloved by a lot of people, but it is probably on a lot of all-time lists. If you were to go find 100, greatest films of all time, it's on some of those for good reason. So it'll be interesting to dive into that one and see what we think and where it goes in the stack rank, which we'll do in the last one. But dude, this has been a blast, man. Thank you so much for hopping on again.
Dude, Kyle, I had a blast. Thank you so much for having me back, man. And yeah, let's do it again.
All right, bro. Thank you.